Okay, we learn about the begodim, the clothes, the different vestments that were worn by the Cohen Gadol. And what do these vestments teach us? So we're told, the Cohen would need to rectify the sins of the Jewish people through his service. And he would have to wear these particular garments. Now why? Why is this? There's so much focus on garments, clothing. And what Rabbi Nosson says here is it's to fix up the sullied garments of the Jewish people. What does that mean? That's right. So if a person considers what is a garment, so a garment is an exterior entity or material that a person wears, and it conveys a message about that person, the type of label that they have, colors that they choose, the configuration of what they're wearing. And the garment that are the most problematic are the garments that a person puts on, not only that are physical and material, but the proverbial garment of arrogance and honor, where a person externalizes a sense of who they are based on their garment, but an externalization of who they are based on garments is not only a physical material thing, but in terms of their perception and what they hold of themselves and how they try to portray themselves to the public. So he writes that that's what the Kohen Gadol was doing. He was engaging in a form of purification and rectification of the garments. Balkain, Noige ikar pagam hakavod bagadim hu ikar geus bebegadim shebshrosham hem gvoyim moed v'chinas Hashem malach geus lavesh. Ukshapoigem bezeh chas v'shalom al yedei avnoisav v'noifel geus v'kavod l'sitra achra shel taiva sivlei oilam hazeh ikar pagam geus hu bebegadim kashnire b'chush kama v'kama oivdim oilam al yedei redifasam achra begadim b'tachshitim. So what's really going on here? If you think about humanity chasing the garment, chasing the clothing, chasing the external shiny elements that a person chases after. Men don't necessarily do this today, but to chase after jewelry, I guess it's the nice watch that people have, or a garment that looks and portrays the individual to others as affluent and successful. What is this obsession, or what is this, the amount of money that is spent on these particular garments? For what? So he writes here, but what the point is that these garments stem from an ultimate space which can rectify everything in a person's life in a healthy way. When they realize that the only element of honor and the only element of elevated beauty is for Hashem. That's where those garments belong. It's also, the Ali Shur brings down, is for one's wife. He says a person should use those things for their wife. They should, beautify and give all of those elements and look to make one's wife happy. But at the end of the day, that beauty and that honor and that reverence that people want in their own lives is for Hashem. And that's the calibration. When a person has that shift and that mindset, Rabbi Nachman brings a story about a certain affluent individual who had many villages, and one far-flung village, he had an individual who would manage the village for him. And the individual managing the village thought, I might as well pretend that I'm this guy, this affluent individual who owns the village. Imagine how they'll treat me. Instead of the general suite, they'll give me the presidential suite. They'll look after me. I can pretend. So he goes there, and his plan works. But the only issue was, a couple of years later down the line, the actual owner says to him, please take me to the village, I want to see what's going on there. So they're walking through the streets, and all the policemen are bowing down to this individual who pretended to be the owner. Can you imagine the embarrassment? Can you imagine the embarrassment? And the same is for us. We try and hold for ourselves all this honor and affluence and have the reverence in other people's eyes. But we're essentially doing the same thing, where Hashem is the owner of all. He's where all of these garments and all of these elements of beauty and reverence and honor are deserving. But yet we hold it for ourselves, pretending we are God. And what Rabbi Nachman is teaching us here is that shift needs to transpire. Okay. That's why the Cohen would wear these very expensive garments. And what was included in all these garments? All of the beautiful materials, gold and silver and techeles, all of these different colors. And on the breastplate was the ones with all the stones, and each stone was invaluable in terms of its quantum. And on the stones was written the names of the Jewish people, which represented the 50 letters with which the entire Torah is written, which are the 50 gates of understanding. And that's why he wore it on his heart. We spoke about it in the shul this morning. What he's saying, the reason why he wore it in his heart was to elevate all of these loves and all of these desires for physical things to Hashem. That all of the need for honor and respect is given over to God.
But he wore it on his heart, on his own emotional feeling, or was it an instruction that it should be worn on the heart?
It was an instruction to be worn on the heart to rectify the loves of the heart, the desires of the heart. And what's happened now is, with the nations of negativity that have overwhelmed the world, and the destruction essentially of the temple, where there's no more Kohen Gadol to wear these garments, people think that they don't have the ability anymore to overcome these desires and these priorities. And understand that the chesed of Hashem is that this strength of the begadim, the clothing of the Kohen Gadol, will never end. Meaning that Hashem's memshala, Hashem's strength and Hashem's kingship is for eternity. V'chaste Hashem es shalach az es Mordechai shichnes Yisrael livlei liyayish es atzmei min arachamim b'shum oifen v'zaku kulam el Hashem yisbarach v'chol lei v'lavshu sak ve'efer. So what happened is we have the story of Purim. Why do we wear costumes on Purim? It's to represent this concept of garments. What was the rectification in Purim, where the Jewish people sought this particular affluence, where they went to the banquet and they wanted to be honored? What happened eventually is Mordechai wore sackcloth and ashes. That was his rectification. He was disgusted by all of these vestments that people wore. What ends up happening is Mordechai is the one that's taken out in the king's garments. Remember that story where Haman was the one that was seeking that particular insight, that particular honor, what ended up happening is Mordechai, the one who was running away from the honor and running away from the prestige and running away from the externality, he was the one that was then paraded out in public in the king's garments. Again, what is the sensitivity of the garment? And what we're seeing here is that the more a person is able to recalibrate their direction and the realization that everything that is here in this world, all the honor of this world, is meant for Hashem. That's it. When a person has that mindset and they say to themselves, I'm upset about particular dishonorable experience, or I'm not feeling enough prestige, what they need to ask themselves is, are they using that energy for God? Are they using that energy entirely to honor Hashem? And that's then a reclaiming of that energy. And that's why Mordechai was the one that was then taken with those garments out in the public. V'chein be'Esther, kosav v'tilbash Esther malchus, ki zeh ikar tikun. Ad shezacha l'idei zeh achar kach livnois habeis hamikdash. Lach zeh bigdei kun and l'mekoyim l'kedushasan. Remember, what was happening at this banquet? You know what was happening at the banquet that the Jewish people were invited to? Achashverosh was clothed in the garments of the Cohen Gadol, sitting there, using the vestments that were used and using the utensils that were used in the temple for himself, to honor himself. Eventually, that whole circumstance shifted and changed to then eventually be brought back to the temple, and eventually the temple was rebuilt, and eventually those garments were then reutilized in the right way. And that's the same question we need to ask ourselves. Again, when we feel overwhelmed with honor and we feel like we're chasing honor, the fundamental question is, who are we honoring? Are we trying to honor ourselves, or are we trying to bring honor to Hashem? V'akein nizzakar inyan begadim mitzoyim pasuk inyan Yeshua Kohen Gadol ki hu haya rishon haya tzarich l'shamesh bebeis sheni machmas toike v'galos nechshel b'nav ad shenigo pagam begadim mitzoyim gam alav. Akein haya kol tikun agula al yedei tfilas hatzadikim shem anshe knesses hagdoila shispallu az v'asku l'taken zois ad shepol Zachariah Navi lahasir begadim mitzoyim alav labish oisei machlotzois. So he says here that the koyach of prayer, the koyach, the strength of a person davening, saying, Hashem, I just want to honor you. I want to bring to you all of the elements of honor and prestige, is essentially the shift that a person can experience in their life. And I think this is one of the reasons why we wear costumes and different garments on Purim, is because we are questioning what type of garments are we wearing in our own lives. Are we wearing costumes? And those, essentially, if a person is wearing a garment to honor themselves rather than honor Hashem, then it is a costume. Because the only honor that a person can experience in their life is with the revelation of godly and divine energy into this world, and being connected to that in their lives. As soon as it becomes detached, it's like a wilting rose that's been picked out of the garden and eventually turns into nothing. And that's the same for us to really consider over Purim and over this very powerful time that we're reading about the garments of the Kohen Gadol. What type of life are we living? Are we living a life that is centered on our own honor, or are we living a life where we're able to bring God's honor into this world and into the world around us and into our own experience of what we do every single day? Shkoyach.